Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to show you an abstract area control game by the name of Carolus Magnus. This is a game that's about 15 years old now. I believe it's out of print, but there are used copies available. You probably could get one for about $30 or $40 at this point. This game was designed by Leo Colovini. I believe it was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres, the German Game of the Year award. And it's an area control game that is for 2 to 4 players, where players are going to be trying to be the first to get their castles into regions which are going to be expanding over the course of the game. And there's a really interesting interplay in this game because it's going to play very differently whether you're playing with 2 players, 3 players, or 4 players, where it actually becomes a team game. It's a game that has very simple rules, but it has very interesting interactions. So I'm going to take a few minutes to just show you a little bit of how the game plays, hopefully to give you some sort of sense of how it works, and then I'll come back and give you some final thoughts on it. Carolus Magnus is a 2 to 4 player area control game in which players are going to be trying to place these castles into these territories. And the game is going to go until either these territories merge so that there's going to be 4 or fewer, or until one player places all their castles. The player who has placed the most castles at that point is going to be the winner. So the game is, like I said, from 2 to 4 players, although it plays significantly differently with between 2 to 4 players. I've set up a 3-player game here, but there'll be changes in setup depending on the number of players. Indeed, in a 4-player game, you're going to be playing with teams with the person who's sitting across from you on your team, and collectively you're going to be playing a set of these to the various locales. So the way the game is set up, you're going to set out these 15 hexes, which are going to represent territories, and you want those not to be touching each other. And then you're going to take these area influence cubes. I believe the game calls them paladins. They're in 5 different colors. You'll take 3 of each and randomly place them on each space. You'll take this Carolus Magnus, or I guess it would be a king pawn, and you're going to place it on one of those spaces at random again. And then each player is going to take a few different things. And again, this is based on a 3-player game. So in a 3-player game, each player is going to get 8 of these castles in a color. They'll get a stack of turn order tiles. They go from 1 to 5, also in that matching color. And then they will get a court. So this will represent their influence at the court. So there'll be spaces here where they can mark if they have the most influence in any of the 5 colors. And then each player is going to get 9 cubes. So the way the cubes are allocated is their game comes with 4 of these dice. They're just 6-sided dice, and you're going to roll them, and then you're going to look at the colors that you've rolled. So in this case, this player would take for their first 4 cubes a red, a pink, and a green. And then they re-rolled for their next 4. They would get a blue, 2 yellow, and then they got this crown symbol, so they would be able to pick which of the 5 colors they want to take whenever they roll a crown. And then to take their 9th, they would just roll once more, and that would determine their 9th cube. So after each player has done that, you're going to have a randomly selected start player, and that player is going to begin the first round. So the round is essentially 3 elements for each player. So first there's going to be a turn order determination, where each player is going to play one of these tiles. In a 3-player game, like I said, there's 1 through 5 for each player. And then each player in turn order will take their actions and then refill their cubes. So those 3 things are going to happen every round. So the way the turn order bidding works is that, starting with, let's say this player is the start player, they are going to be able to place one of their tokens. So you have these 5 tokens. The way that works is you're going to be able to use 1 each round, but they don't replenish until you've used all 5. So if you use your 5 immediately, it's going to be 4 more turns till you get the 5 back. So let's just say this player decides that they're fine with a 3. Now it goes clockwise at the start of the game to the next player. Let's just say they play a 2. They want to go before that player. They would be required to play a different number, if possible, than this player. So they could not play a 3. And then it would come to this player, and let's just say they're not concerned about turn order. They play a 4. So now the turn order would be set for the round. So we'll go this player, this player, this player. This will also determine who's going to start the next round, and in what order players are going to be bidding for turn order next time. So this player, then this player, then this player will be bidding for turn order next round in the same turn order that they're taking actions this round. If ever there is a tie, because let's say in the 5th round, this player only has a 5 left and this player only has a 5 left, so they both play 5s. Whoever places the 5 first is considered the lower number, so they would go first in turn order. But that is how turn order works. And moving on to the actual turn, what you're going to do is relatively simple. So each player is going to have a stack of cubes, and you'll always have 9 at the start of your turn. And you're going to, in a 3-player game, get 4 cube actions. So you could place your cubes. So essentially, you have the option to place cubes either in your court to try to control various powers. So factions are these markers. The player who has placed the most cubes of a given color in their court will control that faction, or you can place cubes directly into the various regions. I'll explain why that matters in a moment. But in this player's first turn, let's say they would want to place 1 blue here for 1 action, a pink, and let's just say they do another pink and another blue. And generally you would want to look at what cubes other players have in their reserve. This is all open information. It's very important that you pay attention to what other people's possible moves are. So after you do that, every time a player finishes placing their 4 cubes, and again, I've only shown you one of the 2 actions, you will look to see if they control a majority of anything. So all the other players haven't moved yet, so they have 0. But this player has 2 cubes in their court for blue and for purple or pink, so they would place those 2 markers there so players know that they control those factions. So now the player at the end of this action is going to be able to move the king. So this player played a 2, and what that means is they will now be able to move the king up to 2 spaces clockwise around the regions. So playing a low number in turn order allows you to go first, but gives you less control over this king pawn. And this is how you're going to be able to place your castles, which is, again, the ultimate goal of the game. So if this player moved 1, let's just say, they could choose to go fewer than 2. Then it will prompt an evaluation in that region. So this region you can see here has just the king's pawn, so that means it's being evaluated, and it has 1 blue cube. So you would look at which player controls the blue pawn, or the blue faction. It's this player here. So you don't worry about this. This just means they're qualified to take this pawn. What you do then is you look at how many cubes are in that region. So there's 1 blue cube, so that would be essentially 1 influence point for this player. Nobody else has any control over any cubes there. There are no other cubes there. So this player, having a strict majority, is able to place a pawn. If ever it was tied, players would not be able to place a pawn. Nobody would can shift control of that region. So that would be the end of that player's turn, except for the fact that they have to roll 4 dice because they place 4 cubes to determine which cubes they're going to take next. So this player would roll. Here they would get a blue, a red, a yellow, and then one of their choice. So let's just say they take blue, red, and yellow, and maybe they would want to take another purple, since they're already working on a purple majority. So that would be the end of their turn, and then this player who played the 3 would go next. So they would, place some cubes. So if they, let's say they place their 2 blue cubes here, they have 2 blue cubes in their court. This player has 2 blue cubes in their court. That would not shift control. You have to supersede the number that another player has. So tying is not sufficient. So that would probably be a not great move unless you were building for a future turn. But what they could do is say, build, red, put 1 red cube in there. Maybe they'll start working on their blues. They could put a pink and they could put a yellow. So they don't have more pink or blue rather, than the other player, but they have more red and yellow than any other player. So they take the red and yellow pawns, put them in their court, and then move the king up to 3 spaces. So since they're controlling red and yellow, they probably want to move onto one of these spaces. So let's say they do that. And now again, they control red, so they get to count this toward their victory point, or their influence total. So they would have an influence total of 1. No other player has more points than them, so they're able to place a castle. So this is basically how every round's going to work, with players doing those three things. So again, this player would then roll refill to their 9 cubes, and then it would be the next player's turn. So on a base level, this is what's going to happen. But at the start of the game, it's very easy to claim these territories. And generally, what you're trying to do is build up as many of the control markers as you can in your region, so you're eligible to claim a region if the pawn moves into it. But like I said, there's another action that you could do on your turn. So let's just say that a few turns into the game, we have something like this, and let's say this player here has placed 4 green here, so they control the green pawns, and then they have some extra green cubes. So it would be, let's say it's this player's turn. They control these 2 regions somehow. They would need at least, I guess, 1 red cube or 2 red cubes to have done that. So at this point, it would be this player's turn. They're controlling green, right? And let's say the king is here. So they've played a 4. So now they'd be able to move 1, 2, 3, or 4 to any of those regions. Ideally, they would take this region, because if you ever control regions that are next to each other, those regions are going to merge. And that will make them harder for other players to take over, because whenever you count a majority in the future, so let's say this came back here, and you evaluated this, the player who has blue, this is the gray player, would count this as 1. And every castle they have within the region would be an additional 1. So that would mean that that player space is harder to take over. So that sounds convoluted, but it's not especially convoluted in practice. So let's say this player, again, wanted to take over this space here. Now, they don't have enough purple cubes to seize the purple pawn from that player, so you would think that they might be stuck here. But the second thing that you could do with your 4 cube actions, besides placing them directly into your court, is you could place cubes into a region directly. Any region. It doesn't need to be the region where the king is, but you generally will want to do that. And this is more of a defensive or an offensive maneuver for a specific region. So it doesn't secure, it doesn't lock down your ability to control this, but it does help you for this specific region. So you're always balancing those 2 things as you play the game. So if the player did that, let's just say they also placed 2 yellow here to capture this yellow, that would be their 4 actions, and then they move the king, they go 1, 2. So now what would happen, because this player placed these 2 cubes here, and they control green, they have 2 influence points. This player still controls the purple, but it's only 1 influence point. So their 2 influence points beats this player's 1 influence point, so they have a majority, so they get to place their pawn here. As soon as you control pawns that are next to each other, or regions that are next to each other with the same colored pawn, then you're going to merge those areas into one large area. So as the king moves around, if he can move 3, you go 1, 2, 3. So this whole area would count as 1. Furthermore, all the cubes are in that area are going to be combined as well. So now, essentially, if the king came around here again, and we were going to evaluate this region, black would have 1, 2, 3. If they still controlled this, they would also have 4, 5. So even though red here has 2 and purple here has 1, the black castles that are in that region are going to count toward their majority. So it becomes very difficult to take back a region once it gets to 3 or 4 tiles, and it also enables that player to kind of shore up their concentrated efforts to hold on to that region. It becomes more of a target for other players as well. So trying to bounce those things is where a lot of the strategy of the game works. So not to get too much into strategy, however, essentially, like I said, the game is going to just keep going, and over the course of the game, people are going to be claiming regions and maybe taking them back. Like, let's say on a future turn, this white player played some cubes down here so they could take this, and they moved in here. So this would be another interesting scenario. So now if this moved in here, they control the blue pawn, or the blue faction. So this is going to be worth 1 point to the white player, but this castle, as long as it's staying here, is worth 1 to the gray. So that would be a tie. Nothing would change there. But if the white player dropped in another blue cube before they went there, now they would have control of the blue pawn, so that would be worth 2 to them versus the 1. They would be able to replace that pawn with one of their own. So since the game is really about getting rid of all your pawns, you can see how that's going to be one of the main factors of the game. So essentially, like I said, the game just keeps going around like this, and over the course of the game, the pace really ramps up as these regions get tighter and harder to take back. So you really start fighting over certain regions, and trying to prevent players from being able to merge regions. Like here and here, this player holds two, so you really want to concentrate on making sure that they don't also capture these two regions. In any case, the game will go until a player has placed all of their pawns on the board, and then they'll win, or until the regions have merged so that there are 4 or fewer. Then you would count up who placed the most pawns, and that person would win. So, in sum, I would say that is how you're going to play Carolus Magnus. Is Carolus Magnus, and I hope my rules explanation wasn't too verbose for what is essentially a pretty simple game. The game, as it works, is you're really just going to bid for turn order, place 4 cubes, whether they're in your court to try to tamper down on control of a given color, or in a region so you could swing that given region, and then just roll to refill the cubes that you have on hand. But in practice, it's one that is somewhat strategically obtuse for some players I've played it with. And to me, that's not a knock. I think that's a game that just presents itself more simply than it actually is in practice. It's a game where making decisions early on really has ramifications later. There are dice in the game, so there is somewhat of an element of luck. But I think having played it, several times over the last, however many years, I find that luck factor is really something that you just have to contend with and deal with in advance. Although you might have 4 or 5 cubes of a given color in your supply at the start of one turn, there's no guarantee you're going to get more of those cubes. So, playing those cubes into your court or into a region is a real commitment, because you never know when more of those are going to come back. Now, some players don't necessarily like the game because of the luck, especially because at the end of the game, and the way that the turn order bidding works, you can be forced to make a move into a region where you're not going to win it, and that could create a chain reaction that gives another player the game. But that's not necessarily a problem with the game as far as I'm concerned. It's not a luck issue if you set off a bad move. It's one that you should have planned ahead for, so you wouldn't be in that situation where you had to make that bad move. But mileage may vary. I know that some people don't like dice in their games, don't like luck in their games, and this is definitely a game that has a certain element of that, but it's something that I think gives the game a lot less room for analysis paralysis. It's one where you have to really kind of be nimble and on your feet, and always paying attention to what cubes people have, how many cubes will it take in your court to take over control of a pawn. Does the other player have more cubes in their supply that they would be able to take it over on the next turn? You're always paying attention to every single move that every other player makes, and I think that makes the game especially fascinating. But again, it's one that I think the very first time that you play it, you might think, this is just completely luck, I don't see what the strategy is. But that's not necessarily a bug. I believe that's a feature. It's a game that is subtler than it looks. It looks just like you just deal with whatever cubes you have, make the best move you can at a given time. But it's one that I think, if you're smart about allocating those cubes, you can make smarter long-term decisions than might first appear. And I will note that some people play with a variant where they either allow re-rolls, or they essentially roll all the dice into sets for the players at the start of the turn, and then as you, instead of rolling the dice individually at the end of your turn, you could take cubes from the pool, from the different sets. You could pick which set, so that might be a slightly less lucky variant, but I haven't found that I need it to enjoy the game. I guess I'll talk a little bit about the player count. So at 2 players, you definitely, I feel that at that count, you're going to feel the luck of the dice more than you will at 3, just because you're only in direct competition with 1 player. So, rolling the wrong things is more detrimental, whereas with 3 players, you have 2 other people to worry about. So although I can't get you this turn because of what I rolled, I can worry about what this player is doing. And you kind of have to keep each other in check, and I like that in the 3-player game. Although it does play well at 2, it feels like a very different game. It's almost like a more tactical, luckier game. And also, I think that the game has an interesting arc where at the start of the game, it seems like you're just plunking down, your castles or your pawns every turn. You're always able to claim something, but then it becomes very difficult to claim things over the course of the game, and you really have to, manipulate the king marker to get on the exact right space that you're going to be able to get. And then near the end, it's almost like a minefield. Practically, the wrong move anywhere could end the game at any point, and you're just playing very defensively while hoping to get that last, crucial region for yourself. So it's a game that has a really interesting narrative arc, and it's a game that I think is somewhat overlooked. It's one that still holds up. There's nothing quite like it. There's not really any area control game that I can think of that's quite like this one. Although maybe Colovini's other game, Clans, is kind of similar, but again, that's just it's similarly abstract, similarly rules-like, but it's really its own animal. This one is, again, it's one that I'd love to see back in print, but like I said, it was relatively popular in its day, so it's not too hard to get copies of it. There is an English printing of it. There's a U.S. printing of it, so you should be able to get it. And then the 2 versus 2 team game is another interesting feature of the game. The fact that you could play it as a 4-player team game does keep it from feeling too chaotic, where you have to wait till, a whole 3 other players make their move before you can make your move again. That would be complete chaos in this game. But because the turns are staggered, you're going to make a move typically. Although again, if you play if you place your turn orders, if 2 players play 4-5 in one turn and then play 1-2 the next turn, you could get 4 turns in a row for your team and really run the board if you plot that correctly. But again, it's never too long until you get 1 turn to the next for your team in that, which, given that you're trying to guess how other players might move that king and what that means for you if you go later in the turn, I guess the big takeaway here is that there's really a lot more strategy and a lot more tactical decision making and trying to guess what your opponents are going to do than it might first appear. It's a game, like I said, that has relatively light rules, but it's one that once you start thinking about the rules and seeing how they interact with each other, it really opens up and it really becomes a much deeper game than it first appears, and a less lucky game than it first appears. So it's a game that I would encourage people to check out. It's Carolus Magnus. I would encourage you to actually try it and then maybe try it again so you can learn from your mistakes and your bad plays the first time. So those are my thoughts on Carolus Magnus, and thanks for watching.